It's weird being on stage in front of a crowd after spending 17 days floating down a remote wilderness river in the bottom of the Grand Canyon. Keith asked me shortly before I left on, as he said, my first extended vacation since I started the Montana Free Press in 2016, if I would come and speak. And I said, Keith, for you, I'll do anything. Sure, of course, I'll come down to Boulder the day after I get back to Montana up the river to give a conversation. What do you want me to talk about? And we decided we'd talk about the thing that I think is really kind of near and dear to both of our hearts, which is the trust that we need to have in journalism in order for journalism to provide a guidebook for our communities. And I thought a lot about these last couple of days after I got off the river. Just Friday, after, like I said, after 16 days, 17 nights, because we put on, we did a tiny little float the day before we had our official launch on the river. But it was a long time to spend with 16 people most of whom I didn't know. And so for 2 weeks, a little bit more than 2 weeks, these 16 people were a community. They were a society, if you will, floating down the river, relying on one another for our day-to-day survival. No joke. If anybody has been down the Colorado River here, you know what I'm talking about. This is not a leisurely trip down the Missouri or even the Blackfoot. This is a daunting endeavor where you put on Lee's Ferry and you don't see another road for 238 miles. We were there in monsoon season, which meant that unpredictable afternoon rains could create literally life-threatening flash floods, which we experienced on, I believe it was day 8 of our trip. So what does this have to do with trust in journalism? I was thinking about this book, this piece of information that every single one of our boats, there were 16 of us on 5 boats, and every single boat had the Guide to the Colorado River and the Grand Canyon, 8th edition. And this piece of literature was our lifeline for 16 days. Navigating rapids, identifying suitable campsites, identifying potential dangers. We relied on this piece of information. It was something that each and every one of us knew that we could trust. And armed with this piece of information and each other, and all of us understanding and agreeing that the facts contained within this book would help get us safely down the river over the course of the next 16 days. That, to me, provided what I think is a pretty good metaphor for the importance of trustworthy journalism in our society. When we have a source of information that we as a community can look to for facts, for information, to understand what the risks, what the opportunities, what the potential dangers, what the interesting highlights. When we have a source that we can all go to and we can all agree that source of information provides value that helps us navigate on a day-to-day basis together, collectively, as a society, whether it's 16 people on the river or a few hundred people in a community or 1 million people in the state, when we're armed with a piece of information that we can all trust is factual, we can avoid dangers, we can avoid pitfalls, we can experience exciting things that we didn't know existed before. We can tap into cultures that we weren't aware of. We can find wonder around corners we didn't know were there. And that to me, I found it, I didn't think it was too much of a stretch to talk about, how important it is to have access to trustworthy information. And folks like us at Montana Free Press and Keith and his team at the Boulder Monitor and local news operations all over the state, they are trusted because the community knows who they are. They know that they're experts. They know the people to talk to get the answers to the questions that people in the community have. And that's what we had, right? Every day we had to get at least 17 miles down the river. Some days were very mellow. We could get on our paddle boards, have a few extra beers, and not really risk anything. Other days, we had 6 rapids that required us to get out of our boat, climb up a cliff, which was dangerous enough as it was, so that we could get a good look at that rapid, read the information in this book, make decisions together as a group to get safely through that rapid. I'm proud to report that despite the fact that not a single one of us on this trip had ever been down the Grand Canyon, not a single one of us on this trip was a professional rafting guide, we didn't flip a single boat in 16 days on the Colorado River. We survived a flash flood in camp that wiped out three of our campsites. One of the campsites where a tent had been just minutes earlier, there was a 10-foot ravine, and everything that was in that campsite was floating down this bubbling red river of flash flood mud that would float out into the Colorado. But we came together as a team and we worked together, and we recovered every piece of gear, and we found high ground, and we found a better place to make it through the night, and we regrouped and we sat down and we read through, okay, what do we have to face for the next 6, 8, 10 days, and how are we going to do this together? And we relied on a piece of information that we all trusted. And I think in Montana, we're still the kind of community, we're still the kind of state that if we come together around facts, if we come together around pieces of information that we can all trust, that collectively we can make those decisions that move us forward and get us safely down the river. I'm really proud to be here. Montana Free Press, our goal from the beginning has been to build trust with our audience, regardless of what your personal experience is, what your personal political views happen to be. We're not looking to try to influence how you behave. We're not trying to influence how you think. We're not trying to tell you what to think. But we do want you to have the facts. And in an era where there's so much noise, so much misinformation, so many places where you can go to be deceived or to be manipulated or to get opinions that are there's nothing wrong with opinions. Heck, this book has opinions. The right channel is viable, in some people's opinion. But you might want to take the left channel where it's a little bit safer and, you have fewer holes that you might end up in. That's kind of how we approach our journalism on a day-to-day basis. And I think really that's how most news organizations, particularly local news organizations that aren't motivated by corporate profits, that aren't looking to get clicks, that aren't looking to generate revenue off of your mere presence, but are rather motivated by providing you with information that you can use to make good decisions in your day-to-day life. That's what we do in our business. I know that's what Keith and the folks at the Boulder Monitor are doing week in and week out. And I think as citizens, if folks come back and look for those trusted sources of information and support them, that we're going to be in a good place as a state going forward. So, that's my spiel on connecting my 16 days on the Grand Canyon to the day-to-day work that I do at the Montana Free Press, and I thank you for having me today.
Got a few minutes. If anyone has questions or thoughts for John on trust, the news, rafting the whitewater, we've got a mic right there. People are very comfortable.
I don't blame them.
I don't blame them either. Okay, thank you so much. Oh, here we go. Good.
Will you tell us a little? Will you tell us a little bit about that video, the movie that was done about you guys? How you started the Free Press?
The Dark Money? The question was if I could talk a little bit about Dark Money. Dark Money was a 2018 documentary film made by a filmmaker based here, grew up in Helena, based out of New York, Kimberly Reed. how to talk about that in this context. In 2013, I was a reporter for the Great Falls Tribune. I was covering the state legislature up in Helena, based out of Helena, working for the Tribune. And I started questioning what was going on with these campaign attack mailers that were going out right on the eve of elections. And there were these groups that we didn't know who they were. They had names like Mothers Against Gun Violence, Western Tradition Partnerships, American Tradition Partnerships, and they all had the same post office box, but there was no other information that you could find about them. You couldn't find out where their money was coming from. You couldn't find out who their board of directors were. You couldn't find out if they had a membership. They didn't have websites. But they were spending, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars to influence the outcome of our elections. And so in 2013, I started doing reporting on that, trying to track down, follow the money, and find out who was behind these groups. That path was a long and winding path. Many journalists, in addition to myself, were uncovering bits and pieces of information about who was involved with these groups and who they were working with. And all along that time, a documentary filmmaker, Kimberly Reed, she was also following that story because I'm sure everybody here has heard of Citizens United. Citizens United had recently passed, which basically said that corporations are people and that money is equivalent to speech, which was what kind of opened the door for these dark money groups to spend money in elections. Montana had a campaign finance law that dated back more than 100 years called the Corrupt Practices Act that limited the amount of money that corporations could contribute to elections and said that corporations couldn't directly contribute to individual candidates. And this all, of course, came out of the history that Montana had with the Anaconda Copper Company and how they were buying off politicians in Helena, literally giving out cash bribes to buy influence in Helena. So with Citizens United on the books, Montana tried to defend its Corrupt Practices Act. That case went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. The filmmaker who was kind of tracking what was going on in D.C. was also kind of tracking what was going on in Montana. And then Montana lost in the Supreme Court, which basically affirmed Citizens United, which meant that dark money was now the new way of life in Montana and national elections. So reporters like myself and many others, Chuck Johnson, Mike Dennison, to name a few, Marne Banks, who was at Montana News, MTN at the time, several other folks were doing reporting on trying to figure out, well, if they're not, by law, if these companies, these corporations, these people who are trying to influence our elections aren't required to tell us who they are and what their motivations are, then we're going to try to find out on behalf of the public. And we did that over the course of several years. And in 2017, right at the start of the Montana Free Press, we were able to find out who was behind all of this dark money spending in Montana, and it turned out it was an out-of-state corporation called National Right to Work Committee. And so while they were purporting to, be advocating for child safety and gun rights and, various other issues, the real motivation of this group was to make Montana a right to work state, basically an anti-union legislation. So we found that out in 2017, and there was a trial. A Bozeman legislator was found to have violated Montana's campaign finance laws and disclosure and ethics laws in 2017, and all of that came together in this documentary film called Dark Money. If you're interested, you can reach out to me, and I can tell you where to. You can find it on Amazon Prime and other streaming services if you're interested. But it won some awards in 2018 and was picked up by PBS nationally, and that led to basically the real launch of the Montana Free Press in 2018 and 2019.
We're good.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. Appreciate you coming, and Hi to one of our favorite board members, Tressa Smith, who's here with us today. Thanks for serving Montana Free Press, Tressa.